Hey guys, I'm back to read some more to you from the Wild Robot Escapes. We are on chapter 63, and this chapter is called The Rowboat. So we left off where Roz had just felt sorry for Shadow. She never meant any of these things to happen, but she had her own troubles, and they were paddling out, and so we'll see how it goes. So this chapter is called The Rowboat. I think I started reading a little bit of this before, but it got cut off, so I'm just going to start from the chapter again. All right. The sun was shining, the fog was thinning, the robot was rowing. Roz was no thief, and she didn't like taking that old rowboat. But judging from its appearance, it had been abandoned years ago. She hopes it wouldn't be missed. Anybody who's rowed one of these boats knows you're supposed to face backward, that it can make it tough to see where you're going. This wasn't a problem for Roz, however. She started off rowing normally, and after several strokes of the oar, she spun her head around until she was facing forward. And then what she saw was blue sky and dark waves and a sliver of green on the horizon. "We're in a bay," said Brightbill, swooping down into the boat. "To the north is that distant coastline. To the east is open water. To the west is a seaport. And to the south is the village and the wolf." It seemed the travelers had no choice but to cross the bay. Luckily, Roz could row long and fast. Brightbill settled in for the ride, and the robot's mechanical muscles started pumping. She pulled and pulled and pulled on the oars, and the rowboat glided through the waves. Roz was nervous. Time and time again, the robot's survival instincts had stopped her from going into deep water. Now an old rowboat was all that separated her from the murky depths. She couldn't wait to feel solid ground beneath her feet again. As they rode deeper into the bay, the waves got larger and rougher. Gigantic swells of water rolled in from the open ocean and started tossing the boat around like a toy. The waves finally became too much for Brightbill. He spread his wings, lifted up on the breeze, and anxiously looked at the choppy surf ahead. "Row faster," he squawked. "I don't know how much more the boat can take." Roz tried to power through. She rowed faster and faster until the boat was skimming across the water. Too fast. The left oar snapped, then the right, and suddenly the boat was at the mercy of the waves. "Hold on, Mama," cried the goose. "Here comes a big one." The rowboat was pulled up the side of a towering wall of water. It teetered at the top. And then the boat went crashing down the other side with such force that the whole thing splintered apart. Roz felt water surging up around her. She clung to debris and kicked her legs, but she wouldn't stay afloat for long. The robot began to sink. The goose floated above. The ocean rolled and sloshed. Then there was a sudden burst of air from somewhere nearby. Brightbill looked toward the noise, but only saw sea spray drifting from the breeze. And when he looked back to his mother, she was dipping below the surface. "What can I do, Mama?" Brightbill called from the air. "Tell me what to do." "There is nothing more you can do," came Roz's gargling voice. I'm sorry." The young goose could only watch as the ocean dragged the robot down, down, down. Pretty intense. Chapter 64, The Sea Creature. Brightbill hovered on the wind and watched his poor mother sinking into the depths. He could still see her body sparkling brightly against the darkness, but she was fading fast. The goose closed his eyes, hoping this was all a bad dream. He heard the distant horns of ships by the seaport. He heard buoys clanging in the harbor. He heard ocean waves churning and frothing louder and louder and louder and louder. The goose opened his eyes and saw the ocean bulging upward. A giant sea creature was rising from the deep. It breached the surface and sent waves rolling away. The creature had a large mouth and long fins and a wide back that curved down into the water. There was a loud burst, and mist shot up from the blowhole. As you might have guessed, reader, that giant creature was a whale. More of the whale emerged from the darkness until something sparkled in the sunlight. It was Roz. She was sprawled against the whale's back, limp, wet, and lifeless. Chapter 65 is called The Whale. The whale swam along the surface of the ocean, keeping our robot safely above the water, gently moving her away from the rough waves. Brightbill couldn't believe what he was seeing. Once the shock wore off, he fluttered down to the whale's back and leaned over his mother. There was no life in her eyes or her body, so the goose did the only thing he could think of. Click, Roz's eyes began to glow. She uttered some human noises, and then in the language of the animals, the robot said, "Oh, Bright Bill, I am so happy to see you." The goose squawked with joy and hugged his mother's face, but she didn't move. She couldn't move. The robot had lost the use of her limbs. There were a few tense minutes and a few nervous glances, but as the sun beat down and the wind brushed over her, Roz felt her body drying out. Slowly, gradually, power returned to her arms, then her legs, and then she sat up and she hugged her son. Bright Bill breathed a sigh of relief. "Mama, when you disappeared below the water, I thought you were gone forever." "So did I," said Roz. "As I sank deeper and deeper, the ocean squeezed my body tighter and tighter. I lost control of my legs and my arms. The last thing I remember was a huge shape swimming toward me, and then I automatically shut down." "That huge shape was a whale," squawked the goose. "We are riding on her back now." A low moan rumbled up through the whale's body. She splashed the water with her fins and took long, wheezing breaths, and spray missed high into the air. Roz paid close attention to the whale's behavior and understood what she was saying. The whale's name was Coral, and she was thrilled to meet our friends. She explained that a flock of geese had flown over the bay and told the coastal birds with the amazing story of the wild robot and her son, the goose. The coastal birds shared the story with the fish and the dolphins and anyone who would listen. In time, the story spread to every creature in the bay. When Coral saw the robot rowing and the goose flying overhead, she knew it had to be Roz and Bright Bill. So she swam behind them in case she could be helpful, and it was a good thing she did. As Coral ferried our friends across the bay, the waves grew smaller and the coastline grew larger. Houses poked out from the trees, sunbathers relaxed on the rocks, boats motored away from the piers. With so many humans around, Roz had to be careful. She lay flat against Coral's back while Bright Bill flew ahead and scouted out the coastline. The goose directed the whale to a quiet, empty cove, and soon the robot was standing on dry land again. Roz asked if there was some way she could repay Coral for saving her life, but the whale, she was just happy to help. She winked one of her enormous eyes, and then she sank beneath the waves. Our friends marched inland, feeling lucky and grateful. But as they thought of the journey still to come, their good feelings gradually turned gloomy. Roz had nearly died crossing that bay. At some point, to get back to the island, she would have to cross an entire ocean. And there's a picture of them on the back of Coral. I love how all the animals continue to come together over and over for Roz and Bright Bill. Like, word keeps spreading. I'm gonna do one more chapter. Chapter 66, The New Land. Zoom, vroom, shoom. Automobiles were gliding up and down the road, passing fields and forests and clusters of houses. None of the passengers had any idea that a robot and a goose were watching from the weeds. Our friends had been hiding there for some time, waiting for the traffic to clear, but the automobiles kept coming. Roz noticed a drainage pipe that crossed under the road. The pipe was dark and grimy, but the travelers, they were getting desperate. Moving through this new land was difficult. There were more humans and robots and buildings and roads than ever before. Roz and Bright Bill traveled far out of their way in wide circles just to avoid small towns. As the days passed, the scenery looked more familiar to Bright Bill. He remembered flying over these lands on his first migration. He knew the towns would only get larger and closer together the farther they went. It would be much faster to sneak through the towns and to continue going around them. So, as night fell, Roz put on fresh camouflage, and with her son watching from the sky, she crept into a town.